He never planned to be a hero. He didn't grow up dreaming of medals or glory. All he wanted was to get out of his small, broken town in West Virginia, place with rusted fences, silent streets, and memories buried beneath years of lost jobs and forgotten dreams. His name was Daniel Cross. At 19, he signed up for the United States Army, not because he had a fire in his heart, but because he had nowhere else to go. No father, no money, no future. The recruiter shook his hand, and for the first time in a long time, someone looked him in the eyes like he mattered. Basic training broke him down and rebuilt him. He wasn't the biggest, the fastest, or the loudest, but there was something in him that wouldn't quit. In the dead of night, when others collapsed, Daniel kept pushing. When the mud soaked through his bones, when the drill sergeant screamed an inch from his face, he just stared forward. The pain didn't scare him. The unknown didn't scare him. He had been through worse, long before the army. By the time he was deployed overseas, Daniel was sharper, leaner, focused. His team called him Stone, not because he was cold, but because he never cracked. No matter what came their way, he stayed calm. The others leaned on him without even realizing it. He wasn't their leader, but in the silence between gunfire and commands, they looked at him to know everything would be okay. Afghanistan was not what he expected. The sun burned, the silence was heavy. The danger never introduced itself, it just showed up, sometimes in the form of a roadside bomb, sometimes as a young man with haunted eyes holding a weapon. Daniel's squad patrolled rural villages and valleys, providing security and aid. The locals didn't trust them, but they feared something worse: men who came in the night, faces covered, voices sharp like broken glass. Weeks turned into months. Every mission was a gamble. You never knew which step would be your last. And then came the night that would change everything. They were sent to secure a valley rumored to be a weapons cache for enemy fighters. Intelligence was thin, but the urgency was real. Daniel's unit moved under the cover of night, each man spaced, alert, breathing the dry mountain air that never seemed to touch your lungs. And then it happened. The first explosion wasn't loud, it was sharp, quick, and cruel. A landmine. One of the men went down instantly before they could react. Gunfire rained from above. It wasn't a firefight, it wasn't a firefight, it was an ambush. Daniel's ears rang, dirt flew into his mouth. He hit the ground, returning fire blindly as they scrambled for cover. Screams, smoke, blood. One of their radios was down, they were cut off. Daniel crawled to the injured soldier, dragging him behind a broken wall. The kid was barely conscious, his leg shredded. Daniel tied a tourniquet with his own belt, hands shaking but steady. More gunfire, more shouts. Time didn't move in seconds, it moved in heartbeats. Their leader, Sergeant Mills, was down, shot in the chest. No movement, no breath. Daniel felt the weight of everything fall on his shoulders in that moment. The bullets didn't stop. His heart didn't stop. The mission didn't stop. He rallied the remaining men, pushed them to a position with better cover. 2 more were hit. The medic was out of supplies. They needed evac. They needed comms. And that's when Daniel made the decision that no one asked him to make. He looked at the map. The nearest relay point was 7 miles through enemy terrain. No vehicle, no backup, no guarantees. But the only working radio sat there, untouched. If someone could get there, they could call in support. Air cover. Extraction. Daniel didn't even tell them. He just looked once at the men, his brothers, then vanished into the night. He was already hit a piece of shrapnel in his side. But he moved fast at first, then slower, then crawling. Every breath burned. Every sound felt like death was trailing him, but he kept going. The stars above didn't shine. The darkness wasn't kind. He bled through his uniform. His hands were raw. He had to stay low, had to stay invisible. His only weapon now was willpower. Mile after mile, crawling, stumbling, falling, standing. His mind flashed to his mother's voice. You're not like the others, Daniel. You carry storms inside you, but you're meant to survive them. He held on to those words like they were stitched into his skin. Hours passed. The sun began to rise behind the mountains. He could see the relay post ahead. One last ridge. And then gunfire again. A scout, enemy patrol. They hadn't seen him, not yet. Could run, he could fight. But he chose silence. He waited, crawled around them like a shadow. By the time he reached the relay station, he could barely stand. He punched in the code, blood dripping down his arm. The signal caught. When Daniel opened his eyes, everything was white. The beeping of machines hummed in the distance. He couldn't move, couldn't feel his left leg. The air smelled like alcohol and burning plastic. His throat felt like it had been torn open and stitched with fire. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper came out. "You're alive," a voice said quietly. He turned his head slowly. A nurse stood there, her eyes red like she hadn't slept in days. She leaned in. "They didn't think you'd make it. You lost too much blood. You were out for nearly 2 days." Daniel blinked, the memories hitting him like shrapnel. His team, the mission, the bullets, the crawl. He tried to sit up. Pain shot through his spine like electricity. "Easy," the nurse whispered. "You need to rest. You saved them." The door opened, and in walked a man in full uniform, stars on his collar, a general. His eyes didn't blink much, but his voice was calm, respectful. "Your cross." Daniel nodded. "Barely." The general stepped closer, then saluted. "You saved your entire squad. We picked them up 2 hours after you made the call. Every single one of them is alive because of you." Daniel didn't cry, he didn't smile, he just let the words sink in. "But you paid a price," the general added. "You won't be returning to active duty. Your leg, it's done." The words hit harder than any bullet. He had trained for this, bled for this. His entire life had found purpose in the uniform. Now it was gone, taken by a moment of bravery that no one had asked for but everyone remembered. Weeks passed, then months. Rehabilitation was worse than the battlefield. Not because of the pain but because of the silence. No teammates, no orders, just mirrors and machines and reminders of what was lost. Some days, Daniel didn't speak to anyone. He'd stare out the window watching others walk freely while he struggled to take 3 steps. His leg was gone. His career was over. The army gave him medals, handshakes, flags folded with pride, but none of it filled the space inside him that was now just cold, hollow wind. And then, one afternoon, a knock came on his hospital room door. A young soldier stepped in, nervous, thin, barely older than 20. His hands trembled. "Are you Cross?" Daniel nodded without interest. The soldier stepped closer. "I was one of the guys you saved." "I was behind the rock, bleeding out. I thought I was dead. I saw you drag Jenkins. I saw you run into the dark. I never got to thank you." Daniel didn't know what to say. The soldier pulled something from his jacket. A photo of their unit pre-deployment. Everyone was smiling. "Carefree, we're alive because of you," he said quietly. "That matters." He left the photo on Daniel's bed and walked out. That night, Daniel stared at that picture for hours. He saw the faces, the laughter, the hope. He remembered every name, every voice, and he realized something. He wasn't just a soldier. He was the reason others still got to be. And maybe, just maybe, that mattered more than medals or perfect legs or career ranks. In the months that followed, Daniel changed, slowly, but completely. He joined a veterans rehab group, then began helping new soldiers dealing with lost legs, arms, peace of mind. He didn't preach, he just sat with them, listened, and when the silence became too loud, he shared his story. Not for sympathy but for truth. He began speaking at military schools, then academies, then he was invited to a televised conference on military resilience. The crowd was silent when he spoke, not because he was dramatic, but because he was honest. He didn't say he was fearless. He said he was terrified the whole time. He didn't say he was a hero. He said he had no choice. He didn't say the pain ever left. He said he learned how to walk with it. Videos of his story began to go viral, not because of production, but because of the message: grit, sacrifice, purpose. Eventually he was invited to Washington, D.C. ceremony. An award. People in suits clapped as he stood now with a carbon fiber prosthetic and addressed the nation with a calm voice that shook the world. He didn't speak of war, he spoke of courage. He said, "We don't get to choose the moment, but we do get to choose the meaning. And I chose to make mine matter." Years passed. Daniel never returned to war, but he never left it behind either. It lived in his bones, in his breath, in the way he walked with steady rhythm like a man who had survived fire and come out steel. In a small town in West Virginia, there's a mural now, of a soldier not in action, not holding a gun but crawling through dirt, reaching forward, bleeding but unstoppable. Under it, 5 words are painted in bold: "Stone never cracked, he rose." And beside that mural, Daniel sometimes walks past, silently, never saying a word, because legends don't need to speak. Their story already does. He spoke 5 words, before blacking out: "This is Cross. Send everything." The ceremony was over, but Daniel didn't feel like celebrating. The applause, the medals, the cameras, they all faded the moment he stepped into the quiet hotel room in Washington, D.C. He removed the medal from around his neck and placed it on the table like it was just another object. He sat down slowly, the ache in his back reminding him of the shrapnel they never removed. His prosthetic leg clicked softly as he adjusted it, and for a moment, all he could hear was the silence he'd grown used to, a silence that followed him since the valley, since that night, since he became someone other than just a soldier. He looked in the mirror, clean-shaven, suit pressed, ribbons on his chest, but his eyes, they didn't belong to a man who had just been honored. They belonged to someone who had seen too much, who had crawled through hell, not for glory, but because no one else could. That night, he couldn't sleep. The dreams never really left. He still woke up in sweat sometimes, his hand reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. He remembered Jenkins' scream, Mill's eyes, the heat of that dirt, and the weight of crawling through darkness with nothing but purpose in his chest. But now, he wasn't on a battlefield. He was a speaker, a warrior of hope. They called him on TV, they made documentaries about him, students wrote essays about him, veterans reached out daily, asking him to speak to their group, their school, their base, but none of them knew what it actually felt like, until he met Tyler. It was at a VA hospital in Texas. He had just given a talk to a group of wounded veterans, men and women with missing limbs, burned skin, and eyes that told stories no one should ever have to live through. After the talk, a nurse approached him quietly and said, "There's someone you should meet. He won't speak to anyone. Hasn't since he got back. But he watched your video," he said. "Maybe you'd understand." Daniel followed her into a dimly lit room at the far end of the hallway. A young man sat in a wheelchair by the window, staring out with a stillness that didn't belong to someone his age. He had a beard too young, eyes too old, and hands that never stopped shaking. "Tyler," Daniel said softly. The young man didn't move. "I'm Daniel Cross. They said you might want to talk." Silence. Daniel sat down beside him, leaned forward, and whispered, "I know what it feels like to be alive, but not living." Tyler blinked. "Just once," Daniel continued. "I remember what it felt like to scream into a night that didn't scream back. To bleed and wonder if the pain is worse than disappearing completely." Tyler's jaw clenched. His hands slowly opened and closed. "They said I was a hero," Daniel said. "But heroes aren't supposed to wake up hoping they don't." Tyler turned his head slightly, just enough to show he was listening. Daniel didn't preach. He didn't motivate. He just spoke the truth, raw, heavy, and without decoration. And in that room, for the first time in months, Tyler whispered back. He said, "I crawled too, but no one came." And Daniel felt something break inside him again, because he knew that pain, and this time, he wasn't going to let someone crawl alone. In the months that followed, Daniel stayed in touch with Tyler, helped him through rehab, sat with him during the bad days, called him at 3 a.m. when the darkness got loud, and something unexpected happened. Daniel began healing too, not physically, but somewhere deeper he realized he wasn't just here to tell his story, he was here to carry others through theirs. He started a program not for soldiers, but for survivors. Not a fancy organization with polished mission statements, just a small group that met once a week in borrowed rooms, basements, church halls. They called it The Crawl. The idea was simple. You don't have to run to recover. You just have to keep moving, 1 inch at a time, one story at a time, one hand reaching out for another. The movement spread. First to other cities, then online. Veterans who had given up on life began finding each other, sharing, crawling together. Daniel's story became more than a memory. It became a bridge. One night, Daniel was invited to speak at a high school in Ohio. The auditorium was packed. Teenagers in hoodies and bowl caps sat with crossed arms, scrolling through phones. A few teachers stood near the exits, looking more bored than the kids. Daniel walked up to the stage slowly, a slight limp in his step. He didn't start with a speech. He didn't show medals or pictures. He just stood there, silent, looking at the crowd. The room quieted. One by one, the students began to notice something different in his eyes. Not fame, not arrogance, but something heavy, something real. He said, "I'm not here to teach you anything. I just want to tell you how it feels to crawl through dirt with blood in your mouth and still keep going." And then he told them. He didn't talk about politics or war. He talked about pain, about fear, about choosing to live when dying would have been easier. He told them about the moment he almost gave up, about the sound of silence when you think no one's coming, and how sometimes you have to become your own rescue. By the time he finished, the auditorium was silent. Phones were down, eyes were wet, even the teacher in the back had stopped checking his watch. A student raised his hand, said, "Did it all matter?" Daniel looked at him for a long moment, and said, "Only if I do something with it now." That single line ended up everywhere the next day, on TikTok, on Instagram Reels, on YouTube Shorts. It wasn't scripted, it wasn't marketed, it just hit people. Within weeks, the quote was printed on shirts, hoodies, even military gym walls. Only, if I do something with it now, it became more than a phrase. It became a challenge. Daniel kept going, from city to city, from room to room. He didn't want fame, he just wanted people to know that pain doesn't have to end you, it can shape you. He visited prisons, where broken men sat with heads low, and left with hope in their eyes. He visited schools where kids had nothing but bad examples and showed them what survival looked like. He went to suicide prevention events and didn't speak like a hero but like a man who had stood on that edge and chosen to come back. And quietly, something beautiful happened. People began crawling again, not just soldiers, but single mums, homeless teens, former addicts, people who had buried their dreams in silence. They heard his story, and suddenly, they believed that maybe, just maybe, they could keep going. Daniel never asked for anything in return. But one day, he received a letter. It was handwritten, shaky. It said, "My son was planning to end his life. He watched your video. Now he wakes up every morning and writes, 'Keep crawling. Thank you for saving my boy.'" Daniel held that letter for hours. It reminded him why he started, why the pain mattered, why the crawl counted. And so, he kept going. Years later, long after the documentaries faded and the media moved on, Daniel was still showing up, still sitting, in folding chairs in cold rooms, still shaking hands, still listening. He believed that legacy wasn't built in headlines, it was built in what you choose to do with your scars. One night, alone in his apartment, he looked at the mirror again. Man staring back wasn't broken anymore. He was built from every inch he had crawled. It had been nearly 10 years since Daniel crawled through that valley alone. A decade since the pain in his ribs reminded him he was still breathing. A decade since he made a decision that would cost him his leg but give others a chance to live. He didn't count years anymore. He counted moments. Moments where he showed up. Moments where someone else stood back up. Moments where a story became a reason to keep going. Daniel never bought a house. He never settled into some big office or fancy studio. He kept things simple. A one-bedroom apartment, a second-hand car, a coffee maker that groaned every morning like it was exhausted too. He traveled light because he had learned that the heavier the heart, the less weight you want on your back. He still wore the bracelet from his unit. Still carried a worn-out photo in his wallet. He'd touch it sometimes when no one was looking, like a silent nod to the ghosts that followed him but never haunted him. Not anymore. They had become part of him, not as pain, but as proof that he lived. One winter evening he was invited to speak at West Point, the U.S. military academy. It wasn't a casual invite. This was the place where future leaders were, born where honor meant more than medals, where silence wasn't awkward, it was sacred. Daniel almost said no, not because he was afraid, but because he didn't believe he belonged among generals and strategists and sons of legacy. But something inside him, the same voice that had once told him to keep crawling, whispered again, so he went. The hall was packed. Cadets sat upright, disciplined, watching as Daniel was introduced. His medals were read aloud, his actions summarized in the cold formal language of citations. But when he walked up to the podium, he didn't carry that weight. He stood with one hand in his pocket. No notes, no rehearsed speech. He looked at them, all of them, and then said quietly, "You've been trained to fight. But have you been trained to lose everything and still get up?" There was a pause, not confusion. "Respect. He continued. "No one trained me to crawl 7 miles through hell. No one taught me how to sleep when the screams of your men echo in your bones. No one prepared me for the silence that comes after the gunfire ends." He paused again, letting the stillness speak. "But you know what saved me? It wasn't strength. It wasn't courage. It was purpose. I didn't crawl because I was brave. I crawled because someone needed me to." The room didn't move. Daniel went on. "You may never crawl like I did, but you'll face your own valleys in war, in life, in loss. And when that moment comes, I hope you remember this. The mission is not always outside. Sometimes the mission is you, your survival, your recovery, your crawl." When he finished, there was no thunderous applause. There was just a long, standing silence, the kind that doesn't need words to say everything. That night, one of the cadets followed him outside, a young woman. Clean uniform, sharp salute. "Sir," she said, voice cracking, "my brother didn't make it back from his deployment. I never understood why he fought so hard." She held up her phone, showing a screenshot of Daniel's story. "Now I do." Daniel didn't reply. He just placed a hand on her shoulder. Sometimes comfort speaks loudest through silence. After West Point, Daniel became quieter. Not withdrawn, just more intentional. He stopped accepting every invitation. stopped chasing stages. He realized that the more famous his story became, the more distant it felt from the crawl that started it all. He didn't want to become an icon. He wanted to remain a man who bled, who broke, and who chose to move anyway, so he went back home. West Virginia, same streets, same rust, but something felt different. The town had changed. Or maybe they had just finally seen him for who he really was. The mural had grown, new faces painted beside his, faces of those who'd served, those who'd fallen, those who were still fighting invisible wars inside their own minds. Daniel didn't live in the past. He didn't replay the night of the crawl anymore. He didn't need to. It had shaped him, not defined him. He had become something more than the pain. He had become someone who gave that pain purpose. One morning, while walking near the edge of town, Daniel saw a boy sitting alone on a bench staring at the ground. Thin hoodie, dirty shoes, the kind of silence around him that Daniel recognized. Instantly, the kind that said, "No one hears me, no one sees me." Daniel sat beside him, no words. After a while the boy whispered, "I don't think I can keep going." Daniel didn't lecture him, didn't ask why. He just leaned forward, took a stick from the ground, and slowly started drawing a crooked line in the dirt. The boy looked at it, confused. Daniel said softly, "This is what crawling looks like." The boy blinked. Daniel continued, "It's not straight, it's not clean. Sometimes you move forward, sometimes sideways, sometimes it feels like you're going nowhere. But if you don't stop, one day you'll look back and see how far you've come." The boy didn't reply, but he stayed, and that was enough. Years later, Daniel would learn that boy's name. He'd see it on a college graduation list. Then again in the Marines. That boy would write him a letter someday saying, "I crawled. Just like you." Daniel smiled. When he read it, folded it gently, placed it with the others. Because that's what legacy looks like. Not statues, not ceremonies, but lives touched, quietly, deeply, forever. As the years passed, Daniel grew slower. His body reminded him daily of the miles it had carried, but his spirit, it never limped. It stood tall even when he didn't. In his final years, he was invited to one last ceremony. No cameras, no stage, just a circle of veterans, some old, some young, all wearing the weight of what they'd seen. They asked him to say something. Daniel looked at them, smiled gently, and said, "When I crawled through that valley, I thought I was dying, but now I know I was being born." They didn't clap, they didn't cry, they just stood and saluted. Years later, when Daniel passed, he didn't have a massive funeral. He didn't want one. But across the country, thousands of people lit candles, wore dog tags, wrote "Keep Crawling" on walls, on helmets, on their hearts, and somewhere in the hills of West Virginia, the mural was updated one last time. It no longer showed him crawling. It showed him standing tall, one hand reaching back to pull someone else forward, because in the end, that was his legacy. He didn't rise alone. He made sure others rose with him, and that is why Daniel Cross was never just a soldier. He was the reason others survived, and he always will be.